Section 4 of The Goodness of Saint Rocque and Other Stories by Alice Dunbar Nelson. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Monsieur Fortier's Violin. Slowly, one by one, the lights in the French opera go out until there is but a single glimmer of pale yellow flickering in the great dark space, a few moments ago all aglitter with jewels and the radiance of womanhood and a clash with music. Darkness now and silence and a great haunted hush over all, save for the distant cheery voice of a stage hand humming a bar of the opera. The glimmer of gas makes a halo about the bowed white head of a little old man putting his violin carefully away in its case with aged, trembling, nervous fingers. Old Monsieur Fortier was the last one out every night. Outside, the air was murky, foggy. Gas and electricity were but faint splotches of light on the thick curtain of fog and mist. Around the opera was a mighty bustle of carriages and drivers, and footmen with a car gaining headway in the street now and then, a howling of names and numbers, the laughter and small talk of cloaked society stepping slowly to its carriages, and the more bourgeoisie vocalization of the foot passengers who streamed along and hummed little bits of music. The fog's denseness was confusing, too, and at one moment it seemed that the little narrow street would become inextricably choked and remain so until some mighty engine would blow the crowd into atoms. It had been a crowded night. From around Toulouse Street, where led the entrance to the Troisième, from the grand stairway, from the entrance to the Quatrième, the human stream poured into the street, nearly all with a song on their lips. Monsieur Fortier stood at the corner, blinking at the beautiful ladies in their carriages. He exchanged a hearty salutation with the saloon-keeper at the corner, then tenderly carrying his violin case, he trudged down Bourbon Street, a little old, bent, withered figure, with shoulders shrugged up to keep warm, as though the faded brown overcoat were not thick enough. Down on Bayeux Road, not so far from Claiborne Street, was a house, little and old and queer, but quite large enough to hold Monsieur Fortier, a wrinkled dame, and a white cat. He was home but little, for on nearly every day there were rehearsals. Then on Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday nights, and twice Sundays, there were performances. So Ma'am Jean and the white cat kept house almost always alone. Then when Monsieur Fortier was at home, why, it was practice all the day, and smoke, snore, sleep at night. Altogether it was not very exhilarating. Monsieur Fortier had played first violin in the orchestra ever since. Well, no one remembered his not playing there. Sometimes there would come breaks in the seasons, and for a year the great building would be dark and silent. Then Monsieur Fortier would do jobs of playing here and there, one night for this ball, another night for that soirée dansant, and in the day work at his trade, that of a cigar-maker. But now for 7 years there had been no break in the season, and the little old violinist was happy. There is nothing sweeter than a regular job, and good music to play, music into which one can put some soul, some expression, and which one must study to understand. Dance music of the frivolous, frothy kind deemed essential to soirees is trivial, easy, uninteresting. So Monsieur Fortier, Ma'am Jean, and the white cat lived a peaceful, uneventful existence out on Bayeux Road. When the opera season was over in February, Monsieur went back to cigar-making, and the white cat purred none the less contentedly. It had been a benefit tonight for the leading tenor, and he had chosen Roland à Roncevaux, a favourite this season, for his farewell. And mon Dieu, mused the little Monsieur, but how his voice had rung out bell-like, piercing above the chorus of the first act. Encore after encore was given, and the bravos of the troisième were enough to stir the most sluggish of pulses. Superbe Pyrénées, qui dressez dans le ciel vos crines couronnées d'un hiver éternel, pour nous livrer passage, ouvrez vos larges flancs, faites vers l'orage, voici venir les Francs. Monsieur quickened his pace down Bourbon Street as he sang the chorus to himself in a thin old voice, and then before he could see in the thick fog he had run into two young men. I beg your pardon, monsieur," he stammered. "Most certainly," was the careless response. Then the speaker, taking a second glance at the object of the rencontre, cried joyfully, "Oh, Monsieur Fortier, is it you? Well, you are so happy, singing your love sonnet to your lady's eyebrow, that you didn't see a thing but the moon, did you? And who is the fair one who should clog your senses so?" There was a deprecating shrug from the little man. "Ma foi, but monsieur must know for sure that I am too old for love songs. I know nothing save that I want that violin of yours. When is it to be mine, Monsieur Fortier?" "Never, never!" exclaimed Monsieur, gripping on as tightly to the case as if he feared it might be wrenched from him. "Mais à l'envers, and to sell mon violon, so very foolish." "Martel," said the first speaker to his companion as they moved on uptown, "I wish you knew that little Frenchman. He's a unique specimen. He has the most exquisite violin I've seen in years, beautiful and mellow as a genuine Cremona, and he can make the music leap, sing, laugh, sob, skip, wail, anything you like from under his bow when he wishes. It's something wonderful. We are good friends. Picked him up in my Frenchtown rambles. I've been trying to buy that instrument since." "To throw it aside a week later?" lazily inquired Martel. "You are like the rest of these 19th century vandals. You can see nothing picturesque that you do not wish to deface for a souvenir. You cannot even let simple happiness alone, but must needs destroy it in a vain attempt to make it your own, or parade it as an advertisement." As for Monsieur Fortier, he went right on with his song and turned into Bayou Road, his shoulders still shrugged high as though he were cold, and into the quaint little house where Mame Jean and the white cat, who always waited up for him at nights, were both nodding over the fire. It was not long after this that the opera closed, and Monsieur went back to his old out-of-season job. But somehow he did not do as well this spring and summer as always. There is a certain amount of cunning and finesse required to roll a cigar just so, that Monsieur seemed to be losing, whether from age or deterioration. It was hard to tell. Nevertheless, there was just about half as much money coming in as formerly, and the quaint little pucker between Monsieur's eyebrows, which served for a frown, came oftener and stayed longer than ever before. "Minesse," he said one day to the white cat. He told all his troubles to her. It was of no use to talk to Mame Jean. She was too deaf to understand. "Minesse, we are gettin' po'. You, père, get hold, and his hands dey go no mo rapidement, and there be no more soirée dese day. Minesse, if la saison don't hurry up, we shall eat very little meat." And Minesse curled her tail and purred. Before the summer had fairly begun, strange rumours began to float about in musical circles. Monsieur Moge would no longer manage the opera, but it would be turned into the hands of Americans, a syndicate. Bah! These English-speaking people could do nothing unless there was a trust, a syndicate, a company immense and dishonest. It was going to be a guarantee business with a strictly financial basis. But worse than all this, the new manager, who was now in France, would not only procure the artists, but a new orchestra, a new leader. Monsieur Fortier grew apprehensive at this, for he knew what the loss of his place would mean to him. September and October came, and the papers were filled with accounts of the new artist from France and of the new orchestra leader, too. He was described as a most talented, progressive, energetic young man. Monsieur Fortier's heart sank at the word progressive. He was anything but that. The New Orleans Creole blood flowed too sluggishly in his old veins. November came. The opera reopened. Monsieur Fortier was not re-engaged. "Manesse," he said with a catch in his voice that strongly resembled a sob, "Manesse, we must go hongry sometime. Ah, mon pauvre Violin, ah, mon Dieu, dey put us out, and dey will not have us. Never mind, we will sing anyhow." And drawing his bow across the strings, he sang in his thin, quavering voice, "Salut d'amour, chaise de pure." It is strange what a peculiar power of fascination former haunts have for the human mind. The criminal, after he has fled from justice, steals back and skulks about the scene of his crime. The employee thrown from work hangs about the place of his former industry. The schoolboy truant or expelled peeps in at the school gate and taunts the good boys within. Monsieur Fortier was no exception. Night after night of the performances he climbed the stairs of the opera and sat, an attentive listener to the orchestra, with one ear inclined to the stage, and a quizzical expression on his wrinkled face. Then he would go home and pat Manesse and fondle the violin. "Ah, Manesse, those new player, not one bit can dey play. Such tones, Manesse, such tones, all the time. Portamento, oh, so very bad. Ah, mon cher Violin, we can play." And he would play and sing a romance and smile tenderly to himself. At first it used to be into the 12e that Monsieur Fortier went, into the front seats, but soon they were too expensive, and after all, one could hear just as well in the 4th row as in the first. After a while, even the rear row of the 12e was too costly, and the little musician wended his way with the plebeians around on Toulouse Street, and climbed the long, tedious flight of stairs into the 3e. It makes no difference to be one row higher. It was more to the liking, after all. One felt more at home up here among the people. If one was thirsty, one could drink a glass of wine or beer, being passed about by the libretto boys, and the music sounded just as well. But it happened one night that Monsieur could not even afford to climb the Toulouse Street stairs. To be sure, there was yet another gallery, the 4e, where the peanut boys went for a dime, but Monsieur could not get down to that yet, so he stayed outside until all the beautiful women in their warm wraps, a bright-hued, chattering throng, came down the grand staircase to their carriages. It was on one of these nights that Courset and Martel found him shivering at the corner. "Hello, Monsieur Fortier," cried Courset. "Are you ready to let me have that violin yet?" "For shame," interrupted Martel. $50, you know," continued Courset, taking no heed of his friend's interpolation. Monsieur Fortier made a courtly bow. "If Monsieur will call at my house on the morrow, he may have mon violon," he said huskily, then turned abruptly on his heel and went down Bourbon Street, his shoulders drawn high as though he were cold. When Courset and Martel entered the gate of the little house on Bayeux Road the next day, there floated out to their ears a wordless song thrilling from the violin, a song that told more than speech or tears or gestures could have done of the utter sorrow and desolation of the little old man. They walked softly up the short red brick walk and tapped at the door. Within, Monsieur Fortier was caressing the violin, with silent tears streaming down his wrinkled grey face. There was not much said on either side. Courset came away with the instrument, leaving the money behind, while Martel grumbled at the essentially sordid, mercenary spirit of the world. Monsieur Fortier turned back into the room, after bowing his visitors out with old-time French courtliness, and turning to the sleepy white cat, said with a dry sob, "Manesse, there's only me and you now." About 6 days later, Courset's morning dreams were disturbed by the announcement of a visitor. Hastily doing a toilette, he descended the stairs to find Monsieur Fortier nervously pacing the hall floor. "I come for bring back your money, yes. I cannot sleep, I cannot eat. Only cry and tink and wish for mon violon. And Manesse and the old woman too, dey mope and look bad too, all for mon violon. I try for to use dat money, but e burn and sting like blood money. I feel like I done sold my child. I cannot go at l'opera no mo. I tink of mon violon. I starve before I live without. My heart, he is broke. I die for mon violon." Courset left the room and returned with the instrument. "Monsieur Fortier," he said, bowing low as he handed the case to the little man, "take your violin. It was a whim with me. a passion with you. And as for the money, why, keep that too. It was worth $100 to have possessed such an instrument, even for 6 days. End of section 4.